Hello, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm Kate McLoughlin, Professor of English Literature at the University of Oxford, and I'm collaborating with the artist Tom Hammick in a series of explorations into silence, painting, and poetry. This is part of the Humanities cultural programme run by the Oxford Research Centre in the Humanities. So I'm delighted to welcome Tom Hammick here today. Tom is in his studio. We're going to go over so Tom can say hello.
Hi, Kate.
Hi. So what we're going to do is watch a film of a conversation that Tom and I had last year between the lockdowns about the silent vision in art and poetry. And this screening will last about 45 minutes. At the end, Tom and I will reappear for a short question and answer session, which will be chaired by Dr. Miriam Kalija, who's one of my co-conveners of the Silence Hub at Oxford. That will last for about 10 minutes until we get to 5 o'clock. So if you have any questions you'd like to put to Tom or to me, please put those in the YouTube chat. And you can do that while the screening's going on. So we'll start the film now, and I hope you enjoy it.
Hello and welcome to The Silent Vision. I'm Kate McLoughlin, Professor of English Literature at the University of Oxford and a Fellow of Harris Manchester College. I'm here with the artist Tom Hammick at the Lindsay Ingram Gallery in London's Mayfair, where his exhibition Nightfire is taking place. Tom and I are talking as part of the Silence Painting Poetry series, which is taking place under the auspices of the Oxford Research Centre in the Humanities cultural programme. Tom is a maker of images using a variety of techniques. His work is in many major public and corporate collections, including the British Museum, the Victoria and Albert Museum, the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, Deutsche Bank, the Yale Centre for British Art, and the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. When I first saw Tom's work, which was in the form of illustrations to the book The Making of Poetry, I was stunned by his sense of depth, his intimation of the things beyond things, and his extraordinarily gorgeous palette of colours. So it's a great treat to meet the man himself, surrounded by his art today. Thank you for talking to us, Tom.
You're very, very sweet. Thank you. It's very moving.
So I wanted to ask you first about the night, silence and inspiration. The title of this exhibition is Nightfire, which is a beautiful play on words that evokes fires that have been lit since ancient times for warmth and light. Also evokes the stars themselves and the idea that your creativity is fired up by the night. So my first question is, what does the nighttime mean for your creative processes?
I could paint in the day, and most artists do. Virginia Woolf made a wonderful quote about night walking and how often when I'm walking around London at night, being a sort of peeping Tom, things are pulled out of the darkness by a kind of internal light, rather like looking into an advent calendar. The same happens in the theatre and the opera. You might have a spotlight on something. In a sense, to me, that's quite metaphorical, because the night literally allows my imagination to pick up on something as if I'm literally boxing it up and taking it out of context and opening it up and looking at it. In the daytime, for me, things are flattened out. And perhaps there's a connection in daytime to the banalities of our everyday life, the school run, the paying the milk bill, and so on and so forth. Whereas at night, things are intoxicating and peculiar and magical.
So I completely get what you mean. I think that's the essay of Virginia Woolf called Street Haunting.
That's right.
Where she's walking around London and she sees so many windows. And I must say, I always find magical looking in a dark night, especially actually in the country more than the city, and seeing amid the darkness and the storm and all the weather a little square of light that's the window. And that's what draws you.
In a sense, it's a sort of poetic vision too. Frost wrote about it. Mm-hmm. There's that feeling in a lot of poems of being on the outside looking in. And I think as an artist, that's what you're doing anyway. It's also a device for love and loss, of being detached from something. It's a bit like that feeling when you're driving along a motorway or a dual carriageway at night and you see a gas station on the hill on the horizon and it's all lit up like this peculiar temple. And it's intoxicating and very seductive. Mm-hmm. But actually, it's a bit of a letdown when actually you go inside it.
And what role does the silence of the nighttime play? Perhaps not so much on a motorway, but there's a certain quietude, or the soundscape has changed in the nighttime from the daytime. Does that play into your creativity?
Very much so. There are practical considerations about why I paint at night. When you have children and a life in the daytime packed, it's a bit of escapism. I like this feeling. Actually, Roald Dahl, when I used to read to my children, wrote about it in the BFG of all these kind of thoughts flying around at night, and it's a bit like whale music that travels for so long, or even the owl's music, or a dog barking on the other side of the valley. Sound travels in a very different way. It's like being underwater, and it's incredibly atmospheric. And I need the silence of the night or a particular noise of the night to help me work and not be interrupted.
So in a number of the works in this exhibition, The Unending Sky and Sky Park and Liebe Study 2 in The Sound of Sound, you depict a solitary figure, and that figure is lying on the ground, staring up at a wondrous sky filled with stars and meteors and comets and all kinds of heavenly bodies. And before talking about the skies, I'd like to ask you about that figure lying there. The ground that the figure's lying on is quite often a deep, dark colour. And I wondered how much it represents your own feeling of creativity, how much it actually represents you and your subject.
I love your questions. You ask questions and you think in a very different way than a painter might think, or a particular sort of painter. I mean, I'm quite a painterly painter, and the images come to me in that kind of hypnagogic state where I'm waking up out of sleep. And half the time I'm not quite sure why something is what it is. But when you wrote that observation and question down, I thought about it quite a lot. I feel that I need the blanket dark around that figure in those pictures to almost like falling in through space, and it creates a sort of mental space that a velvet that I can then imagine around and in. So it also has, I mean, you write it beautifully in that poem, which I'm a fan of yours, about how the light even at night of snow, turns to this delicious blue. And blue's everywhere in my work. I think there's a sort of imaginative connection to blue, even though it might not be there at night around me. Anyway, to answer your question is, I also need a darkness around it to pick up and pick out the things that aren't dark. Does that make sense?
It does. The light in the window when the rest of the building is dark, or the light in the building when you come across it over a hill. Yes, absolutely, because that surrounding darkness makes meaning of the block of light, the dot of light. And I think your paintings have so many incredible dots of light in them, and so many squares of light, windows of light as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's a kind of thing I do quite a lot. It's also a metaphysical thing. I mean, when you try and paint a fire, which is impossible, it's impossible to paint a piece of fire. So that's an interesting challenge, and it's static. It's so annoying being a painter, everything being static. But I suppose there's something extraordinarily it kind of arcs back in time. You mentioned it in your introduction about fires keeping people warm all this time. You see a fire and then all the embers glowing and everything, and it's both a wonderful excuse and opportunity for colour, in this case often orange, but in Tristan's fire, one version, lots of blues and smoky colours. It acts as a metaphor, rather like what you're talking about with the window lit up, surrounded by darkness. I haven't really answered your question, but I like the way at night I'm unbound, whereas in the daytime I'm very terrestrial, because everything relates to gravity in a funny sort of way, whereas at night you defy gravity.
So it sounds very much as though the night is the space of the imagination. It's a place where illumination, literal illumination, can come through. And it's a magical and mysterious place, and it's a place without limits. Which brings me on to the title of your work, The Unending Sky, that word unending. It comes from a poem by John Masefield. And I wondered if you might read the poem, and then we could maybe think about... There you go.
So, as you will know more than anyone, John Masefield was Poet Laureate for a long time, wasn't he? Mm-hmm. And this was written in 1917. So I think the context of this poem, which is moving, very moving, is all those poor men on all sides of the war, British and German and Canadian and French, an American by 1917, an Indian and South African, from all over the world. That's why I like Owen so much, losing their lives. And it becomes rather Nietzschean, wouldn't you think? I mean, this poem about really the big sleep, to quote Raymond Chandler, who I love. Okay, I'll read it. The Unending Sky. I could not sleep for thinking of the sky, the unending sky, with all its million suns, which turn their planets everlastingly in nothing, where the firehead comet runs. If I could sail that nothing, I should cross silence and emptiness with dark stars passing. Then, in the darkness, see a point of gloss burn to a glow and glare, and keep amassing, and rage into a sun with wandering planets, and drop behind, and then, as I proceed, see his last light upon his last moon's granites die to dark that would be night indeed. Night, where my soul might sail 1,000,000 years in nothing, not even death, not even tears.
So It's a very powerful poem, and as you say, written in 1917, so the First World War's a kind of backdrop to it. He's describing a journey into space, and I know that's something that's inspired previous work of yours, like Lunar Voyage. He's going beyond silence and emptiness into a night that is nothingness, not even death, he says, not even tears. What's your reaction to such a nothingness? Is it exciting, terrifying, desirable, inspiring? Or none of those things?
Well, I think it's incredibly alarming, really. I think one of the things in my big painting of this figure looking up in the sky, I'm trying to also touch on things being very corporeal. I mean, you'll know about that word more than anyone, I think. This Coleridgean word of being both in the universe and the universe being inside you. So there is a connection to almost quantum physics here of being stardust, of trying to create an image or a metaphor. And this is impossible. So I don't even know why I'm trying. And it can turn out to be too illustrative or too sweet or too gushing. But I suppose there's something I'm trying to do that is trying to touch on the enormity and the old-fashioned sense of the word of the universe and our sense of extraordinary, or my sense of wonderment, which came about deeply in lockdown for a lot of us. Mm-hmm. I mean, The Guardian decided lockdown as those who had and those who had not, and that was to do with those who had a garden. And I had access, my studio's in a field, and the connection to this extraordinary sense of lying on the edge of the crust as I breathe of the earth, as I breathe in real time and the earth spins and turns around our solar system, our sun, in slow time. That all sort of comes together when you're thinking about it and you have this extraordinary sense of the world kind of holding its breath.
So a very spellbinding moment, I suppose. It's interesting, during lockdown, I have a garden, and my husband and I slept out on a ground sheet in sleeping bags. It was on my bucket list, and it was when it was very hot. And it was slightly terrifying. It was such a strange thing to do. I'm not particularly a camper, so you're actually doing this for the first time. But I know exactly what you mean about that deep connection and that sense of kind of going into nothingness. Which brings me on to my last question in this particular section, which is about Liebestod, the title of two of your works in this exhibition. It's the music at the end of Wagner's opera Tristan und Isolde, and in English it means love of death. So I just wondered whether the sense of that kind of fascination with the endless sky, is there sort of, you've described it as exciting, but is there a sort of sense of yearning for oblivion in there, a kind of death wish almost?
Well, if we go to Wagner, I mean, Liebestod, love, it's interesting because you put love of death. I always call it love death, which is quite nice. It's a bit like Nightfire. You know, you know, I love death, or love of death, or love and death. And I love the way the German language bolts things on together. It's quite jealous-making and gritty. In the opera, of course, Tristan has either died or is dying in Isolde's arms on the shore in Brittany. And he's been waiting for her to appear. And she appears eventually. And there's this extraordinary aria that she sings as she then dies, about stardust and about literally their love and their passion being detached from untethered and literally floating around in the universe together. It's deeply romantic. Or anyone, any friend who doesn't like Wagner, this is just deeply corny. It depends on where you come from. But I suppose, what was the question again? I think that...
Desire for oblivion?
Yeah, well, there is a certain desire for oblivion, I think. If you're a romantic, and I am a romantic, and I think being a romantic is hell. It's hell for the romantic, and it's hell for the friend of the romantic. Well, because you're on this quest, this yearning trajectory of goo, and it's not really attached to anything. And it's very important to have, to try and triangulate that. Otherwise, you'd just be floating off into the mists of. And I think if you're a manic depressive, or if you're manic, which I am and always have been, and I've had to take rather powerful pills to keep me in the middle somewhere, and I've been in and out of, the Maudsley, and things have been quite intense and often not wanted to live. To cope with it, it's like self-medication for me, and I've never said this before, and I've never really made this connection. You have to sail very close to the wind. Yeah. And I do that in my painting. And it is a sort of external embodiment of what I feel inside, like that beautiful poem you wrote. And I think poets are the greatest exponents of this connection to the soul, and the connection between what goes on inside and what's going on out here, and that kind of semi-permeable membrane between the two. And then it comes music, and then the novel, and then writing, very much the novel with writing, and then painting comes as sort of fourth or fifth. And it's difficult to get that tingle moment, but I think a lot of it's wrapped up in what you're alluding to.
It's interesting. I put painting right up there. I think with that tingle moment, for me, it's to do with colours. I think it's really interesting what you say about sailing close to the wind. There's something about romantic writers getting near to the terror, but not quite going in, getting very, very close, so you feel the tingle and you feel the fear, and being able to retreat, but being fascinated with it, and taking the reader so that the reader's got a guide to the terror, but knows that it's still going to be safe. And there's some sort of frisson in that, I think, as well, just contemplating the nothingness, the abyss, or the ineffable, but just being able to come back from the edge.
I agree with that.
So in this section, we're going to talk about the vision of alone, and very kindly, Tom is going to read a poem I wrote about snow and scholarship.
I love this poem, and it's very, very visual. Snow, China. And then there's a sort of preamble before the poem. Asanoshin remembered how diligent scholars in ancient China, having no lamp oil, read by the reflected luminescence of snow or by the light of fireflies they'd caught. The modern life of Shidokan, Fury Shidokan Den, 1763. I have long since left the plain. It is winter now. Snow lies in drifts on the trails higher than my head. The way is blocked to travellers. On this silent mountain, words must be conserved like oil. Day is white, night purest blue, deepening to black ink, which I use to inscribe the wings of fireflies. Often I confuse them with the stars. All is silent except for the snow's presence and my own breathing. The oil, like the ink, has run out. The scrolls, like the snow, remain. At night, I open my window to eat the cold air, and the shimmering snow illuminates what is written. The snow is blinding, and I understand. I am becoming snow, whirling from obscurity into clarity, a flake sent into the centre of pure comprehension.
Thank you, Tom. So when I was writing that, I was thinking about what it means to be a scholar, to go deeply into a subject and to become more and more alone. And I thought of that in terms of going higher and higher up a mountain. And I also read about these scholars who would read by the light of the snow, the luminescence of the snow and the light of fireflies. And I thought, yes, when you get obsessed as an academic, that's what you would do. You would actually use a firefly to read by. And so it's about that going into the centre of things, being obsessive and becoming quite lonely when you're a scholar. I wonder if we can link that with your image, Tristan's Fire, which appears in different media in this exhibition. And there are colours of different hues in it, but at the centre of it is this burning fire, and it's burning without a human in the picture. So I wonder what it means for a fire to burn alone. It's so bright, that yellow and orange. There's a brightness right in the centre, and it reminds me of what you were saying about the lighted windows in the London squares that Virginia Woolf saw. And then there's deep darkness as well. What does it mean for a fire to burn alone? It looks as though nobody's lit that fire.
Kiefer did a series of paintings early on in his life as a painter. There's linked to Siegfried. I wanted to find a rather simple metaphor for what was in Tristan's heart. And all I needed to do was really paint a picture of a fire. And I've done it in lots of different ways. Here's another one. And then mono prints and woodcuts and other things around the place. I thought it would be very illustrative if I painted I didn't need Tristan lying down by the fire like in a sort of Western and cowboys. I thought the fire would do it. And actually the backdrop of what's been happening globally with all these fires, forest fires, and never before has the Amazon been burnt so fast. And this is like we're burning our lungs, our lifeblood. And the fires in California and the fires going on in Australia. So there's a parallel thing going on with actually what's happening to our planet. And a very simple metaphor about the intensity of this man's passion. It's actually concocted by a potion, a magic potion, So as he's dying, it's still burning very bright, but it's fading out. It's on the way out.
Mm. And those colours link with another image, which is Study 1, in the world's breath.
Yeah.
And here, the colours of the sky are kind of gorgeous, so midnight blue, pink, golds and white.
Well, you're on this quest, aren't you, Kate? And you're writing a lot about and inquiring and investing a lot of time asking questions about silence. Mm. And I think I can play those games too in my language. But here I'm doing the opposite. In a sense, this is sort of corporeality on acid, on magic mushrooms. Here is, in a sense, the building blocks, rather like the aurora borealis of the universe, as I see them almost. But they're in my heart, and they're outside, and they're pretty intense, and they're And they are, in one sense, I don't know if you've seen the Aurora Borealis before, but I took I was working my passage on a ship and picking up concrete in northern Russia. And I saw them for the first time, and you've got this extraordinary colours, like sort of isinglass in the sky. And they're silent, but they scream out as well. It's this funny combination of silence and sound.
Absolutely, and I understand what you mean in terms of it's a very colourful sky, very, very vivid. But my eye is drawn to the purpley sort of indigo and midnight blue streaks in it. And that to me, yes, particularly that dark sort of diagonal. And that hitting the dark ground, and there's a space between the figure and the sky. There's something about a fold of silence there. Do you see that?
I think I would if I was looking at it the right way around. No, but I do see that. J.G. Ballard writes beautifully about this. He's a real hero of mine, and he paints pictures in his short stories to do with colour and light and silence and the unending sky and universe. Somehow he's very optimistic. I hope this was quite optimistic. It's kind of trying to, failing miserably, paint a picture about what it's like to be a human living in the cosmos.
In which there are all kinds of colours and all kinds of degrees of sound.
Of course. So it's like finding a kind of prism of colour coming out. Almost like the cover of the Pink Floyd album, Dark Side of the Moon.
What colours do you associate with silence? Some people think white, some people seem to think black, dark.
All colours can be silent for me, but it's to do with what they're next to or how they're framed. So, I mean, blue, I think, the way you describe in your poem, the blue of night on white. James Turrell, the American artist who creates these extraordinary installations of light in darkness, has, I think, an extraordinary collection to a very spiritual sort of silence. And he can do that with all sorts of hues. What do you think?
I think, in my mind, comes dark, dark blue, the kind of blue that when you see shots of people going down into the ocean, when it stops being lightish blue and before it gets black, a very, very deep blue.
Sort of indigo,
yes,
Russian blue,
which I also see.
Colour.
Yes, which I see in your work a lot, actually. I don't know whether that's why I'm drawn to it. It's a colour I really love, which makes it sound as though I love silence, and I do love silence, but I can also find silence terrifying sometimes and also tedious sometimes and awkward sometimes. But at its best, it has that sort of mysticism about it and that incredible depth. It's to do with solitude, and I think it's also to do with stillness. And if you can translate stillness into a two-dimensional image, I think you're absolutely right that it's what's put next to what. So how busy is a picture? So I think you're right. That is quite a busy sky, but nonetheless there's calmness in it.
They say that there have been experiments that you'll know about of encasing people in felt rooms. And it's so frightening, the silence, people kind of go mad. And of course you never hear silence, in the sense, a sort of oxymoron, that you can, and then you hear your heart beating. So we're never really in total silence.
No.
But to have silence, you need a bit of noise.
Exactly, and so that makes translating that into your work, having the colours around it. So there's that absolutely gorgeous sort of pinkish colour next to the blue, and then another gorgeous turquoise. So it's about juxtapositions, I suppose.
Yeah, and it's also just about tasting colour in this rather...
Yeah.
Synesthesia is quite big in me. I think I was kind of rather like... I think my mum dipped me in something, or I was in a vat of magic mushrooms or something, where colour is connected to taste.
Oh, okay.
As well as sound. And I can use colour, it's my own little private thing that gets me going in the middle of the night.
Interesting. So I slightly have it too, very, very slightly, and my dad did as well. And I get sort of halos around words, proper nouns. So
Lovely.
The days of the week or the months of the year. So Tom is quite a blue word to me. But what are you talking about that you do in the middle of the night? Do you think about colours or?
I taste the colours when I'm painting them, or a painting has to have a certain taste and a certain atmosphere to it, and I think a lot of it is that quest for that, and that's just a private language that I don't really need to share too much, but it's almost unspoken and it's almost impossible to really define. It's very touchy-feely.
Yeah.
And what you want to do is get to the painting to the point where the painting starts telling you what to do. Where's this coming from? Painting telling me what to do, but it does. It says, actually, if you're very in the zone, surrounded by the deep silence, which is like you described, going down into... I mean, Elizabeth Bishop, the great American poet who I absolutely adore, who's just amazing. She describes this at the Fitch Houses, this briny... She compares the universe to this briny water that's a transmutation of fire. It's so cold, it's a transmutation of fire. And I think this is what helps me at night when I'm painting.
So the title of one of your works, The Narrow Road to the Deep North, comes from a mixed prose and poetry work by the 16th century Japanese poet Basho. In it, Basho describes a long journey he took on foot. So I wonder if you'd mind reading from the text. This is a translation by Nobuyuki Yuasa for Penguin Classics. It's just this here.
It was early on the morning of March the 27th that I took to the road. There was darkness lingering in the sky, and the moon was still visible, though gradually thinning away. The faint shadow of Mount Fuji and the cherry blossoms, Rino and Yakara, were bidding me a last farewell. I walked all through that day, ever wishing to return after seeing the strange sights of the far north, but not really believing in the possibility, for I knew that departing like this on a long journey in the second year of Ganaroku, I should only accumulate more frosty hairs on my head as I approached the colder regions. I think Basho is an extraordinary poet, don't you? I mean, he seems to me to write about silence unlike any other poet that I've really come across. Is it the form that does that as well? Or is it the fact that his whole framework is the natural world around him?
It's so hard to say, not speaking Japanese. To me, it seems something to do with the simplicity of language and the slowness of thought doesn't quite express it properly, but the kind of unhurried nature of his writings. Also, I suppose the pinpoint sort of detail of them. That's what comes over to me in English translation. I would love to be able to get into Japanese well enough so that you could actually get the sense of what the original's like. he's describing, I think, in a very measured way, this idea of walking on, and he's making a kind of classic comparison between the journey and life, and, you know, his hair will be grey by the time he gets there, if he is going to get there. And I'm interested in what you do as an artist when you're thinking about something unending. So you've got several works in this exhibition where there's a person, an individual, walking along a path. And I just wondered if you could say something about the technical challenges of representing a path that's endless.
Wow. I think so much of what I do as a painter comes from children's books and from the pantomime and the theatre. And I remember we used to go to the pantomime in Windsor, and there was always Trevor Bannister, who was in Are You Being Served, who was the Dane. And whether it was Dick Whittington or Puss in Boots, or there was always a backdrop at some point in the pantomime, hugely, brilliantly painted by a screen painter, with our hero and anti-hero running around, going to London where the streets are paved in gold. And there's always this rather circuitous path going through the woods and ending up there. And it is a bit like, you know, the Yellow Brick Road in the Wizard of Oz, or, you know, we know it from so many kind of stories and myths. Red Riding Hood going through the woods, Hansel and Gretel trying to follow a path of white pebbles and then bread that's been eaten by birds. So it's quite literal in some ways. But I have to, you know, do I have the thing rather like in a Chinese painting? Do I have scroll painting? Do I have the path disappearing and then re-emerging as if you're in the savannah and you're looking across a vast distance? Or do I need to see it all the way through? I think those are partly stylistic and compositional devices that you paint and paint out and repaint in the process of time in a painting. So the painting kind of gets to the point where it tells you how to do it. But you could have a very limited, you know, just a title like the artist Bob Law, who lived, a brilliant artist. You know, he would just draw the edge around a piece of paper, and he would talk about the edge of a field. So it's very conceptual. Or Richard Long, that brilliant piece, early piece in the 60s of him walking backwards and forwards on the grass, and for grass being very flattened, and you have this extraordinary metaphor for, in a sense, the journey through life. So it can be done in all sorts of ways. And late Rothko, his, you know, brown and grey paintings, which are so flat, they're the first paintings really that he does which don't have a border. So the horizon line, which is key in your question, I think, to create a sense of space in a two-dimensional plane, helps one, in a sense, imagine crossing that space.
Absolutely. So I think by your use of the term horizon line, I've understood what I've been seeing, which is that the paths that you show, the paths you depict, seem to be getting higher. There's an upward sort of space. So there's a figure in the foreground of the picture, and the space seems to be getting higher, which is a really lovely way of showing this. I mean, it's another sense of the unending sky. There's maybe an upwards movement. It's not obvious that they're climbing up a hill.
No, it's very observant of you. I think I'm not so interested in the Western tradition of perspectival space.
Right.
I'm very interested in a more kind of metaphorical sense of space that you get with very simple figure and ground relationships in, for instance, Indian painting, Indian miniature painting, where the space behind the figure is stretched out on the picture plane. So in a sense, the landscape is used as a hanger for the journeying of the soul or our yearning. It's very romantic, you know, and it's not very realistic, but it's incredibly realistic if you allow yourself in that zone of colour and form and flatness. And you talked about flatness a lot, and flatness is important for me.
I love this idea of getting into the zone of colour and space and form and lines. I mean, I think with all your works, I get a sense of immediately falling into that zone, and I don't know whether it's the colour that brings me in or the central points, the contrasts, but there's a real sense of getting into another world.
That's very lovely, and that's I'm incredibly honoured you said that. In a sense, what I want to do is I want to create enough going on in the picture, but not be so specific. I'm very interested in the kind of schism between being specific and being universal. How specific do I need to be to create universality? And it's a difficult thing, and Elizabeth Bishop does it so well, and she talks about it a lot throughout her life. How do I give you a sense of place, but it's yours and not mine? But I need it to be mine to make it, and it to be as truthful as it can be. But I don't want it to be so specific it becomes illustrative.
I think that idea of making space, making a zone that has specificity both for the artist and for the viewer is a great point on which to end. So thank you so much.
Thanks for coming. I've enjoyed it.
Well, thank you very much for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed that. We have a little time now for Q&A, if anybody has any questions. I'm going to hand over to Miriam as chair. I think maybe there was a comment put in the chat.
Yes, hello. Well, thank you for letting me come into your conversation. And as we are waiting for some of our audience's questions, I wanted to ask you, first of all, how did you come to collaborate with each other? This would be my first question. And the second question, of course, for me is really interesting as your collaborator in different fields, Kate. What did you learn from Tom about literary silences? And then, of course, Tom could maybe answer the question from his perspective.
In terms of our collaboration, I hunted Tom down, and Tom's work in an amazing book called The Making of Poetry by Adam Nicholson, which was about the year that Wordsworth and Coleridge spent in Somerset, 1798. And the illustrations which Tom made specially for that book just absolutely blew me away. As I mentioned in the interview, I have a thing about colour, and it was a mixture of the colours and the titles. So I have one of Tom's prints called "She is Known to Every Star," and I couldn't imagine anything more spine-tingling. So that's when I thought, got to get this person. In terms of what I've learned about silences, literary silences from artistic silences, I think it's all to do with it's to do with hues, but it's also to do with busyness, juxtapositions, and a sense of the beyond, which again I think comes through all of Tom's work. I mean, he did this amazing collection called The Lunar Voyage, and this idea of infinite space. It's just quite incredible how you can get it on a limited canvas. Tom, what would your answer be?
Well, I think your poems, I love that poem that I read out about the snow. And it's a ravishing poem, and it's incredibly mesmeric and visual for me. And it's quiet, and of course it's difficult for us to do this because we're talking about silence, which is impossible. But when you read it on the page, the silence comes to life, so to speak. And that's what you can do in your poetry. And I think that's what I can do, I hope, sometimes in painting, especially when I'm not talking about it.
Yeah. Yeah, just while I was listening to you and watching you, of course, too. I mean, there's so many different layers of silence in there as well. I was reminded of the work by the Marxist composer Luigi Nonno, who once said that silence is a way to go beyond yourself. You know, it's actually not only the permission, but also the you know, you are inviting people to go beyond yourself. I think it's also in a way maybe a hesitation before meaning making, right? The ground that clears before something can be seen, and something can be read, and something can be heard, and something can be listened to. And I wonder, I mean, we are still, you know, discussing the beyond, but the beyond, I wonder whether both of you could give me a good definition of what you actually mean by the beyond. Is it an invitation? Is it a permission? What is it for you in your work?
Kate?
Well, I think there are, I would have different answers to that, but just because you very kindly read my poem, I would focus on the silence of scholarship. And in that case, it's an absolute sort of determination stroke obsession to get to the heart of the thing, not to give up, even when you're tracking down the most abstruse footnote. It's something about, as Nonno said, it's going beyond yourself. And in scholarship, that's going into sort of silent oceans of thought. And I noticed on the YouTube chat that somebody said they missed the silence of the library, and particularly the upper reading room in the Radcliffe Camera. This person's initials are SG. SG, I don't know if you're aware of Sounds of the Bodleian, which is an online thing in which the Bodleian Library recorded the sounds of different reading rooms, including the upper camera. The only thing is they are quite noisy. Even Duke Humphrey, which to me seems sepulchral in real life, is actually quite noisy with breathing and books dropping and rustles and that kind of thing. But if you need something to carry you through until we're all back in the upper reading room again, or the upper camera again, then I would Google Sounds of the Bodleian. But Tom, what do you think about finding the beyond?
Well, in a way, it's similar. Scholarship. It's the process of painting. Guston, Philip Guston, who's a brilliant American painter who died in about 1980, 79, he described the process of painting as being in the room with lots of people while you're working. And I've always had it with my heroes sitting on my shoulder and whispering into your ears. And then eventually, as you carry on painting, they eventually leave the room. And then you leave the room. And there's this connection in the process of the painting between you and the painting, and you're on your own and you're just a filter. And I think when you're in that state of working, nothing can touch you. You're completely immersed in it. And time, often I would start a painting at 10 or 8 at night, and by the time I looked up, it would be the birds were singing in the dawn chorus at 5 in the morning, and the time would have gone like that. And it's in this kind of globe of silence that we're working in.
Yeah, it's for me, of course, I mean, bringing myself maybe into it is also, it's where you catch a glimpse of infinity and eternity. It's a spiritual place where you're connected with, you know, the past and the future. And I'm reminded of an essay by Jean Amery about a survival in Auschwitz, and he said those who believed in something could not be touched by anything. And that just resonated with you, you know, that you say that there is so much grace and dignity in that moment that nothing really can you know, take you down. And I find that very beautiful. So it's also, would you describe it as a spiritual experience, or because it's clearly not a day-to-day experience anymore?
Yeah, I would describe it as a spiritual experience almost. Eamon Duval, I think he's very interesting on this subject, and his work is very minimal anyway, and very clear. And he's been doing a lot of also, incidentally, work with libraries in different places around the world. But yes, I would describe it exactly as that.
So we have a question from the audience, from Liz. Thank you, Liz, for writing in. She's asking, I was interested by the sense that colors have a taste. Do you feel that silence has a connection to taste? Wow. Or any of the other physical senses? An incredible question.
Might be a bit above my pay grade, that question. It's very, very good. I have to think about that.
Okay, we will give you a moment to think about it, but Kate, you don't get that, so you need to answer it.
Well, it's interesting, Tom, that you describe colours as having a taste. And so if a colour can represent silence, maybe there's a certain taste to that. I think what's coming in my mind, the idea of silence having a taste, because I associate silence with great sort of tranquility and deep blues, deep greens, not really blacks, but deep blues and deep greens. And the equivalent taste for me, I suppose, would be dark chocolate. It's that sort of elegant sort of taste. I don't know. What do you think?
I'm not sure. I mean, there's definitely a smell of silence, and it's by association partly. I think at night there seemed to be much more ozone around, and you can almost smell the breeze coming into my studio. Often I'll work with the doors open, and I'm also visited by lots of insects, and it's the sort of peripheral hum of what's going around in the universe and in the field around me that creates a silence as well. Like we talked about in the little film, you almost have to have incidents of noise to create the scale for silence being at the other end of it.
Mm-hmm. Like a scaffolding. It comes to my own work also a little bit, that of course silence doesn't exist without the other. So if silence has a taste, maybe it has a taste of a meal shared together, because there's always an intersubjectivity involved in silence. And that brings me to my next question to you, Tom. What do you think about this intersubjectivity? I mean, are you in silence that who is your other in the silence, I guess, is the short version of my question.
Who is the other? Sorry, I didn't hear that. Who is
the other in your silence? Because if we go from the point that silence does not exist without the other, that there needs to be a certain kind of connection, who would be the other? Your future audience, or the conversation partners on your shoulder that you're painting with?
I think very much that. I mean, you mentioned earlier on at the beginning of your introduction about the process where you're kind of linking the past and the future, and you're kind of in real time breathing away. And I think the other is often my past and love and loss, people I love, people I'm missing, kind of memory, and the experiences that I've had that have kind of back in my memory banks. It becomes while being in quite a lonely place, all these sort of ghosts come to visit me.
And then silence is kind of like a fire escape out of that past into the future, maybe a place. I often think silence is a place where I'm no longer afraid. It is a quite safe and secure place. But what about you, Kate, about this in intersubjectivity of silence? Can you do anything with that in terms of literature, or who is your other when you're writing your poetry?
I think this sounds terribly solipsistic. I think I have an inner voice that's me talking to me in a way, but that inner voice is all the sum of my experiences as well. When I'm out walking in silence, I'm listening, and I feel as though if there's an interlocutor, it's sort of the universe, which also sounds very grandiose. It's either me or the universe, but listening to all the different sounds. So it could be the wind, for example. Walking in forests, it could be the trees. In literature, I think it's really fascinating. I'm working on the Victorian novel at the moment, and I'm looking at George Eliot in particular, and it's so striking that in her most emotionally charged scenes, there'll be a point where the characters dissolve into silence. I didn't know which verb to use there, sort of descend into silence or become silent.
Rest and silence.
Yeah, and it's very much an intersubjective thing, but it's almost this kind of sacred communion between them, I'd say.
There's another comment from the audience, which brings me to it says silence, of course, is golden. There's a lot of folk stories and folkloric sayings, family sayings even about silence. So I just want to skip to another question from the audience to you, Tom. Your paintings are very calming. I do agree, but I find them also exciting. But the question is, your paintings are very calming. Do you find walking a meditative practice? Who doesn't? But let us know about your walking experiences.
The poet Edward Thomas had to self-medicate. He was very blue a lot of the time, and one of the ways he and like we all do, I think, we find ways of coping with ourselves and with what's going on around in the world, and how we relate to the world. And he to help himself with his blueness, his darkness, he walked and walked and walked. And I think I'm the same. He also loved walking around Sussex and the home counties and Hampshire and Kent and West Sussex. And I have that same need to walk around a lot. And Kate described it very well, and hearing herself breathe and listening to the world around you, while also you have your inner voice and you're trying to kind of, in a sense, tie the two together.
So there is a question, another one from the audience about, it's difficult for me to pronounce, Coleridge. Do you experience it in a contemporary color, or is there a kind of translation involved? Do you see the questions in?
Yes. So from our friend Alex Harris, Tom's colouring feels so contemporary to me. When you read writing from the past like Coleridge, do you experience it in luminous contemporary colour, or is there a kind of translation involved? So are there past colours and present colours?
That's such a good question. I think I contemporize what's going on, really. I think I very much did that in Adam's book, The Making of Poetry. I had this conundrum of trying to make images around poetry, and of course Coleridge being so corporeal, there was a lot going on between what was going on inside him, what was going on around him, and I suppose the only way that I could deal with that was become a sort of try and become very ineffectively a contemporary Coleridge. And we went to the Quantock and we ran around the hills and with friends, and Alexander was there too, and I suppose I contemporized it, and that's what I always try and do in my work. So when I'm painting and inspired by Basho or Bishop or whoever it might be, I suppose I'm living now, and by living now, the nowness of my life ends up in the imagery, even though the source material might be from a long time ago.
Yeah, certain afterness. Just to close up the discussion, huge thank you to both of you. And now I wanted to come back to that comment about a silence is golden, which of course is a saying. What is your favorite sayings, each of you, about silence in a sentence? Do you have a favorite saying or sentence that describes silence for you?
So I think that silence is golden. I'm sure it is a kind of folk saying, but where it gets written down is in Sartor Resartus by Thomas Carlyle, and he quotes this the whole thing, which is speech is silver, but silence is golden. And you think of speech as being almost like quicksilver, and silence is this sort of almost like a seam of ore running through a rock. Well, I quite like the Bodleian silence, please. I have got the Bodleian mug which says silence, please on it, and I think that's a kind of nice and the expression about silence.
Tom, the last word to you.
No, I'm at a loss at the moment. I'm having a senior moment about it. I know that as soon as this ends, I'll have lots of things, but I haven't got anything at the moment.
Okay, then I would like to close this discussion. Would you like to say something more, or shall we bid farewell in silence maybe, and hopefully we will see you two together again, because I think the combination between literature, poetry, painting, and it was just really enriching for us all.
Well, thank you. And we are planning further films, lockdown permitting. I would just like to thank everybody for joining us, for Tom for his wonderful insights and being so generous with his time, to the Torch team, especially Holly and Hayley for supporting us, and to you, Miriam, for joining us as chair, for stepping in. So just a big thank you to everybody, and bye for now.
Thank you.